Hello, Steve. Hi, thank you so much for being with us on my podcast and my YouTube channel.
Hello, how are you doing?
Fine. First of all, tell our listeners where you're talking from. Where are you speaking from?
I'm UK. I'm in Cornwall. It's the Florida of the UK,
That
I always
sounds
say anyway.
that sounds good. Sounds
Everybody
tropical.
thinks the whole UK is London. No,
I
I'm
know.
as far away from London as possible.
Yeah, I know a little bit about London because I lived there for a while, but we do think the UK is London usually. Buckingham Palace, to be more specific.
Yeah, I don't live there.
Unfortunately. Or maybe not, who knows? Well, Steve, I would like to start talking to you about your life and who Steve Webb is, because we tend to have this misconception and the idea that someone who thinks about suicide or someone who attempted suicide or even died by it, it's like their life freezes there, like they didn't have any previous life, they weren't kids. It defines who they are. So I would like to first hear from you. Who are you? Who was the child? Where were you brought up? Your parents, family?
Who am I? What a deep question to start with. Um, yeah, I'm. Where do you start with that? That's like a
You can
normal
start with
childhood.
childhood. Yeah.
A normal childhood. I lived on a little small holding. It was very adventurous. We were the typical children. We used to walk to school at that time, even when we were 7, 8 years old. Um, we had animals. I grew up half of the time on a farm, so I was very love the countryside, always outside. Um, then we moved to the city, and because things went wrong with my mum and my dad at the time, they split up,
Mhm.
they divorced, and we moved to the city. And we lived in a caravan for about 6 months. So it was an adventure for me. I was like 9, 10 years old. So
Mhm.
this was a big adventure for me. For my
Yeah.
mum, it must have been real hell because living in a caravan, not knowing where you're going to live next to
Mm.
anything.
Yeah.
So we moved out of there. We moved into what I now know as a homeless place
Hmm.
where everybody's living together. I remember me, my sister was about 3 years older than me. The three of us were living in one room and we could share a kitchen. We could go down, but for some reason, we didn't really go down to the kitchen or anything like that. So we stayed in our room. And I can remember one night sitting on this big double bed, the three of us, and we were eating porridge out of saucepans.
Uh-huh.
And it was great, for a youngster. It's like camping. But it must have been hell for my mum to think
Yeah, I can
like,
imagine. Yeah.
and my sister, been 3 years older, 12, 13, going through those years. And
Mm.
so it must have been really difficult for my mum at that point. And then no, I say we found a house. My mum managed to find a house and we moved in. And things started to stabilize. And then I think it's about 2 years later, I then went up to the senior school,
Mhm.
which was kind of glad because I was bullied a little bit at my previous school. It was like on the way home, there was this big green area.
Mhm.
And I used to have to run the gauntlet when I left school every night. And I used to pack my coat in the last break, put it in my bag because we weren't allowed to take the coat in the
Mhm.
classroom.
Mhm.
And just when it got to 3:10, I started packing my bag slowly. So I was the first one out the class. And if I got to the top of the hill
Mm.
before the other youngsters that used to bully me a little bit, because I only just started at the school,
Mhm.
I was okay. I could get home in plenty of time. Everything was fine. But if I
Mhm.
didn't get there in that perfect time, I had to go the long way round.
Mhm.
And the long way round meant I was late home. So I got in trouble for being home. So I
So
was caught.
you were in trouble in
I,
both.
yeah, I
Yeah.
was caught between the thing. It's kind of funny now. A few years later, I helped him out, and he believes now I saved his life. So it's kind of ironic,
Yeah, that's how
and
life goes. Yeah.
and I don't blame him. He had a reputation on his estate to keep up. It's that kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
I was new to the area, and I don't blame my parents. They just worried about me. So the
Mm.
three of us just feared. All
Mhm.
three of us living in fear. And then a couple of years later, my first experience of suicide was when my granddad went missing.
Mhm.
He was a farmer. I was very close to him, and my mum never got on with my granddad at the time.
Mhm.
But then she suddenly got a phone call one morning that he was missing. He'd been missing all day, and I can't quite remember the whole storyline. But he went up to the croft that morning, and they found that he shot himself.
Oh.
So that was my first experience. But of course, at 12 years old, I didn't really know what it really meant.
Did they tell you? Did you know then?
Um, they did. I can remember lying in bed. We was in bunk beds, and I had my stepbrother in the bunk bed below, and my stepdad come in and woke me up and said, "Your granddad's been found." And I was like, "Okay, um, he has died." And then I think over the coming weeks, you find out a
Mhm.
bit more.
Mhm.
They might have even told me that day. I really cannot remember. Um, but it was quite surreal. It's not really real.
Mhm.
It's like
Yeah.
it doesn't quite sink in how final it is.
Yes, of
You
course.
know,
Yeah.
that was 1987, and I still haven't seen him yet.
Huh.
He still hasn't come back in my life yet.
Mhm.
You
Yeah.
kind of think they're going to.
Mhm.
It's so final, and death is so. There's no coming back from it. But then I had the normal teenage years,
Yeah. Which
girlfriends and
means
school.
tough.
Oh, it was horribly tough. I can
Yeah.
remember sitting around the dining room table so many times with my friend Simon and going, "Oh, I can't believe this. It's really hard." And we were always talking about girls, and it was the
Yeah.
hardest
Yeah.
time of my life. And then, and then there was a particular summer when I was 18, and just before that summer, I met the love of my life. That puppy love,
Mhm.
and of course, my parents didn't overly approve. But of course, the endorphins won over reason at the time. So I
Yeah.
ran away with her, made up all the excuses. I came back, and when I came back, it was a big long story I told my mum about a promotion, and
Mhm.
but I come back, and they eventually said that we know you've been lying to us, and you didn't get that promotion, and you were up there
Uh-huh.
living with her. So I came home, and then I went to live with my dad temporarily for a while.
Mhm.
And this was when this love of my life found somebody else.
Mhm.
I found that really hard to cope with.
Mhm.
And I came back one Saturday afternoon to sort things out. And I can remember I bumped into her after not being able to find her for a while.
Mhm.
And we live in a town of 27,000 people. We have a lovely cathedral in the center of town. It was a Saturday afternoon, and the sun was out, and it was busy. And I can remember being there with my stepsister and sitting on the steps of the cathedral, bawling my eyes out in front of everyone. This
Mm.
18-year-old. So I remember saying to my dad that evening, you could break every bone in my body,
And
and
it won't hurt as much.
it won't come anywhere close to this pain.
Yeah.
And that was my first encounter of, do you know what, emotional pain is so painful.
Mhm.
That deep gut wrenching feeling that nothing touches.
Mhm.
That there is nothing that can ease it. You can't take
Yeah.
painkillers.
Yeah.
A friend can put their arm around you and all that, and it eases it, but nothing really takes it away.
Mhm.
And I can't remember. The rest of that summer was quite a blur, really. I did a few months later, or a few weeks later, I wanted to get her back. I thought I was
Mhm.
sorted. I thought it was time.
Mhm.
And I went in town, and she didn't want to know, not interested. I think I seen her in one of the bars or something.
Mhm.
And I can't quite remember if she was with somebody else or anything, but I then went and took um, which this is a story. These are the two stories I don't know if I shared on the podcast or not, but I went and bought 2 bottles of pills.
Mm,
I Over in this country, you could only buy so many at a time, so I had to go to 2 different places,
mm-hmm,
and I went and taken them in a quite bizarre way. I climbed up onto a wall so she couldn't get to me, and I was taking them in front of her. And of course, that wasn't an attempt of suicide. That was, you know, will you come back with me and I'll stop doing
mm-hmm.
this?
Yeah, that was
That
your way of expressing that pain then.
Yeah, I really thought that if I did that, she would come back, and
Mm-hmm.
we're not always thinking
Mm-mm.
clearly.
No.
Um, Later that day, I came home to my sisters, and they called an ambulance, and the ambulance said, "Are you going to come so we can help you?" And I was like, "No." And they said, "Okay, we'll leave you there," which that really frightened me at that point.
Mm-hmm.
I went into hospital, but then what a bizarre year. And just going through it in my mind now, September the 1st, I went swimming with my friends, sorting my life in out,
Mm-hmm.
and I climbed up on the wall. I think it was a Sunday night. It was about 10 o'clock. We went up there. It was just hanging out with some friends. This
Mm-hmm.
pool was heated and lit up, and it was really warm. And I climbed up the corner of the wall and walked along the top. And I looked at my watch, and my watch said 10:31. And I dived in, and that's when I broke my neck and ended up paralyzed
Wow.
instantly.
That so that all of that happened in 1 year.
Pretty much, that was a long year.
Wow.
Um, it it wasn't all bad. I had
Of
some
course, yeah.
great times, but that's what we're talking about here. So
Yes.
it was a roller coaster. I had really great summers, great days, and really down days.
Mm-hmm.
And I loved my childhood. My childhood was one big adventure. It was really that
Mm-hmm.
roller coaster of showing what a human can experience in life.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
And you have, in a way, you have that safety net to go back to.
yeah, it's very often when I tell the story of some of my childhood in this context, it makes it look like it was quite a depressive one and all that. It really wasn't.
Mm-hmm.
It was really that roller coaster of experiencing life. And I'm
Mm-hmm.
glad I experienced it young as growing up, because, if you have that balanced of everything is just okay, it
Mm-hmm.
doesn't prepare the muscles for when things go wrong and when things go right.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. It
Um,
helps build resilience.
it does, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And then I come home from hospital, and I carried on my fun times, like girlfriends and getting drunk quite often and going out
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
having a good time. I met Emma, and she had a 4-year-old daughter.
Mm-hmm.
In I think it was my late 20s.
Mm-hmm.
We
Mm-hmm.
stayed together we were together for 12 years. And Kemba, she moved in when she was 4, and she's still, I say still my daughter now, of course she is.
Of course,
Um,
yeah.
she's my stepdaughter, but
Mm-hmm.
she really is the gift of life to me. She's amazing. She's now
Mm-hmm.
23. I better get that right, hadn't I? She's now 23, and
As
you
long as
know,
you don't say she's older, that's fine.
yeah, I'll remember that one. That's a
Yeah.
that's a good tip. Uh,
Yeah,
So
sorry, but can we talk? One of the things that I often try to do with my audience is help them understand, and I do believe this helps combat the stigma surrounding suicide, is to help them understand the mindset of a person who attempts suicides or thinks about it. Sometimes it's ideation is just over and over again. So, can you tell me what happened to you that led you to a place of hopelessness?
yeah, I for a few months me and Emma were growing apart. I
Mhm.
felt more alone at home.
Mhm.
Although we'd be lying next to each other in the bed, there was no longer that connection. There was no longer that
Mhm.
togetherness. You can feel that. You just know that. Even when the
Yeah.
cuddles are there, you
Yeah.
just know that's
Yeah.
not there. And as time went on, I got suspicious that she was seeing somebody else.
Mhm.
And it come to one day when I looked up and said, "Are you? Look at me straight. Are you seeing somebody else?" And she said, "Yes." And I don't know where I found that strength in that moment, but I looked up and said, "Okay, has it gone any further than just interest?" She said, "Yeah." I said, "Okay, you can stay here tonight and move out tomorrow." Um, and at that point, I kind of I kind of felt really hopeless. I felt like I'd really failed. Here I was
Mhm. Mhm.
for many years. I, from a masculine point of view, I secured a girlfriend. I was here
Mhm.
paralyzed. My hands are paralyzed. My nearly whole body's paralyzed. I
Mhm.
can move my arms somewhat. I'm in an electric wheelchair. And all of
Mhm.
those things on the masculine side are
Mhm.
not great ideals. You don't,
Mhm.
as a child, grow up to be. That's not what you would see as a man and a masculine man. And I just felt like I failed in every way of being a man. Here I was single. I
Mhm.
was coming up 40. I was never going to get anybody ever again. This
Mhm.
was, for years, I felt like I was okay. You know, I,
Mhm.
I wasn't as much of a failure as I thought I could have been.
Mhm.
And then for someone to go off with an able bodied person, to me, just it destroyed the masculine side of me. And
Mhm.
it just, where was I? Who was I? I
Mhm.
built all my hopes up on to be someone, to be the man, to
Yeah, sure.
have the girl on my shoulder, have the
Uh-huh.
family. It's evolution has given us that
Mhm.
drive. And at that point, I don't know if it's so much pain, but I just felt what's really the point?
Mhm.
And I can remember sat here one afternoon and I wrote a letter out on the computer. I printed out on the printer and I left it face down because I didn't
Mhm.
want anybody to see it before I went and was gone.
Mhm.
That was my rational thinking.
Mhm.
And I left here. I had the plan of how I was going to do it.
Mhm.
So I left here and in my electric wheelchair, and I had to be let out. So I just made the excuse. I was just popping out for a little
Mhm.
errand, walk or something. I can't remember what I said.
Mhm.
And I drove down about a mile and a half away from here to a nice little lane, country lane. And on the way there, there's a gate that you can see in through the gate, and you see these rabbits at the bottom of the field. And I
Mhm.
sat there and I watched them for a while, and it
Mhm.
was just nice and peaceful. And then it was starting to get later. No one was phoning. No one was checking where I was to. I kept checking my phone.
Mhm.
No one knew that I was feeling like this, but I felt everybody should have known I was feeling like
Yeah.
this.
Yeah.
There's 7 billion people in the world. How come nobody knows I'm about to go and do this? How come none
Wow.
of my friends can see this? How come none of my friends can see what I'm feeling?
Mhm.
And of course, in that moment, I could look back now and think everything, I was the center of the universe in that moment. And I couldn't understand why
Mhm.
nobody was there for me or anything like that. And it wasn't, even if they phoned, I'd have probably said, "Hey, yeah, I'm fine," and put the phone down again. So I
Mm.
wouldn't have known what to do if they had phoned me.
Mhm. But you still you thought about this connection. You wanted that
Yeah.
connection, someone to care.
I desperately wanted someone to just know that I was hurting,
Mm.
but I didn't want the people I loved to be hurting. In this weird paradox that
Mhm.
I wanted
Mhm.
them to, I wanted them to know I was hurting, but I didn't want them to feel the pain.
I see.
So I carried on along the road, and I come to a place where I thought it'd be ideal. I
Mhm.
thought if I drive off this bank, I would crash down. It was quite soft,
Mm.
so crashing down the bank would be not too painful.
Mhm.
And there'd be a river at the bottom. And but if anybody's seen me, they would have struggled to save me,
Mhm.
and no one would have found me for a while. And I planned it, and it's funny because I planned it that it wouldn't hurt as well.
Mm.
I remember thinking, I don't want to hurt doing it.
Of course, yeah.
I don't want to bang my head or anything. It's
Mhm.
and I kept looking at my phone, and it was getting later, and my phone got to like 10% or something like that, and I thought, well, okay, I'll do it in 10 minutes.
Mhm.
I decided that I was going to do it, but I was going to spend the next 10 minutes.
Mhm.
Um, I will spend the next 10 minutes thinking about my life,
Mhm.
and in doing that, I thought about my daughter. I thought about
Yeah.
everybody in my life, and I thought about what would happen if I did it,
Yeah.
and that image of my family and my daughter at the funeral stood in front,
Mhm.
like just stood there. I just couldn't do that to them.
Mhm.
And then it turned into, well, if I can't do that to them, I've got them in my life. I've got them still here.
Mhm. Mhm.
And it just gave me that hope that, well, if they're in my life and I don't want to hurt them, well, perhaps I should go back and talk to them. Perhaps I've got something to live for.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
I realized that it would be a selfish thing for me to do to go and put them all through that.
Mhm. Mhm.
But then just something changed. And on the drive home, it was like I was suddenly going through all the things in life I had.
Hmm. They were playing in your head, like your life and
Yeah,
everything. Yeah.
yeah, all the things I had, and I was here, and suddenly you could hear the birds. I
Mm.
know it sounds corny, but
No, no, it's not
it
corny. It's just
it was like I could smell, I could see
Mhm.
things, and when I seen those rabbits on the way back, it was totally different. There
Mhm.
was like a connection with everything around,
What a
and
what a shift, huh?
I thought, well, I don't know what's the other side.
Mhm.
I don't even know whether I would know I was the other side or whatever.
Mhm.
That will happen one day. That's inevitable. But there's no rush. And
Mhm.
and I it wasn't the fact that I was thinking I had so much to live for. It was more realizing that in this moment is not that bad.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
This moment is not that bad.
Mhm.
And I think over the coming days, something really shifted in the fact that everything is just temporary. Even those most painful times of sitting on the steps of the cathedral,
Mhm.
those pains aren't there now.
Mhm. Mhm.
They weren't there a couple of days, a few weeks later. They come and go.
Mhm.
Even the thoughts of my partner swinging around the chandeliers or whatever in the bedrooms,
Mhm.
they come and go. They're temporary.
Mhm.
And it just gave me this ability to see that, the pleasures in life come and go. The pains in life come and go.
Mhm.
Nothing is permanent. And come back in a week's time. If it's still
Mhm.
that bad in a week's time, or come back in a month's time.
Mhm.
But
Mhm.
just give it more chance because it is so permanent. There is no coming back. There's no like, oh, I made a mistake.
Mhm. Mhm.
Nothing lasts forever.
Mhm. Yeah, I love the point that you're making, Steve, because for you, at that moment, you found meaning. You gave yourself time to rethink and to reevaluate some things in your life. But for some people, I'm just trying to help other people see that they may be in that situation too, and they can maybe reach out for someone.
Yeah,
Because you said I'm one person in 7 billion people in the world, and no one knows what I'm going through. And this is so common with people who are going through that kind of a pain.
yeah.
They feel so alone, and reaching out is so important. I remember hearing you talk about that. Can you give us, did it change for you too? Were you able to open up more after that?
Um, yeah, it's amazing. You don't have to tell. I never told anybody I did that. I shared that
Mm-hmm.
on my podcast.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have to go to someone and say anything more than, "Look, I'm struggling. Let's go
Mm-hmm.
cinema," or
Mm-hmm.
"I'm struggling. Let's just go and have a cup of tea. Just be with me for a while. Listen to
Yeah.
some favorite
Mm-hmm.
songs with me."
Mm-hmm.
You
Mm-hmm.
don't have to share what you're going through.
Sure. Yeah.
And if you're someone's friend, if you're the other person that might get that phone call, you don't have to be a counselor. You don't have to be anything else. You
Mm-hmm.
just have to just be there at the end of the phone
Mm-hmm.
and just allow the phone to be there. And you don't even have to reply. Just to know that someone else knows that you're not feeling on top of the world sometimes
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
just makes all the difference.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it wasn't counselors I needed. It wasn't doctor's
Mm-hmm.
appointments. It wasn't all the
Mm-hmm.
other things. Those are all important. They all have their part. But at that point, it's nice for someone to say, "Hey, you okay?"
Mm-hmm.
And just to be able to go, "Do you know what? I'm struggling, and thank you for asking."
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
that's it.
Mm-hmm. It's very simple, isn't it? Because as you said, I hear this all the time because of my website and the work I do with suicide prevention. I've had so many people I don't know contact me, and that's all they need is someone to reply. And it
Yeah,
doesn't have to be long. It doesn't have, as you said, you don't have to be a counselor. You just have to show that there is someone who cares and wants to listen.
yeah. And you don't have to fix anything.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing needs
Yeah.
fixing.
Mm-hmm.
Um, especially for myself and what I do now, I help people that overthink things and have really busy lives find a little inner peace.
Mm-hmm.
And very often it's just recognizing that we've got all the answers inside anyway. We know what we should be doing. We've
Mm-hmm.
already found 100 things that work in life.
Mm-hmm.
It's just to give us that little space for us to be able to work through it ourselves
Mm-hmm.
and then be able to do something with it. We have the answers inside, they're there. We
Mm-hmm.
don't need someone giving us the answers we already know.
Mm-hmm.
Just give us the space to grow into our answers, grow into when we're ready.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh. And did it help you identify your triggers, for example? I mean, do you know when you may be getting to that point?
Good question. I get overwhelmed a lot.
Mm-hmm.
I really,
Of course, yeah.
I help people with overwhelm.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it's one of the things I really feel like I specialize in because
Mm-hmm.
I suffer from it a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And when I get overwhelmed, my meaning of overwhelmed is I have so much going on in my life within and externally that it's
Mm-hmm.
all coming to fruition at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
So my whole to-do list, my whole
Mm-hmm.
next 12 months of stuff has to be done now.
Mm-hmm.
And my brain doesn't have a timeline of things. It just has a whole heap of stuff to do. And
Mm-hmm.
that's one of my things. I I tend to think about everything I need to do. I tend to feel all these emotions, and I get burnt out. And then when I get burnt out, I really just want to lock the door, sit down. If I was able-bodied, this is what I would do. I would lock the door. I would draw the curtains. I would sit in
Mhm.
front of the sofa, put my knees up, and just go, time out, please.
Mhm. Yeah.
Um, it it's fine to take time out,
Mhm. Mhm.
so I recognize that. But if I don't take that time out, it just builds and builds and builds
Mhm.
until at some point your emotions force you to drown in them. You
Mhm.
know, I
Yeah.
often say emotions are very much like when you're building a little dam to keep the water back on the beach for a little stream on the beach, and you're building that sand dam, and you have some element of success. But at some point, the flow of the emotions, the flow of that water will break the dam down.
Mhm.
And while it's learning to allow the emotions to flow, come and go, the
Mhm.
overwhelm to be there, recognize it. Oh, I'm feeling a little overwhelmed. 5 minutes time out, or I need a weekend away, or I need
Uh-huh.
this. And have a friend that knows you get overwhelmed. Have a
Mhm.
friend that you can say, hey, last year when I really struggled, I'm feeling like that's getting there now. I just want you to be aware. Can you be aware? So when I phone you and say, hey, I'm feeling like this, can you just be there? So you're actually priming them for what you need.
Mhm. Mhm.
Because very often our friends feel hopeless. They don't know what they need.
Yeah, and it helps too to say you don't have to do much. I'm not talking about suicide. I'm not talking about
Yeah,
ending my life. I just need someone to just stay here with me.
exactly.
hmm Yeah, it's not much, and it's unfortunate because some people do get to that point, and you just said, I've started thinking about my daughter and what I have in my life, but unfortunately, for some people, you don't get there.
No,
And it's not a matter of, he was selfish, you use that word, but no, sometimes you do get to that point and you don't realize, you really don't see, the pain is so overwhelming that you don't realize that you have some things in life. And if you
yeah,
don't, maybe it's a time for you to take that time out or build those relationships. But know
yeah,
that as you said, 7 billion people, they will only know you're going through pain if you reach out.
yeah. It it's really you're saying about that realization, and we can only feel one emotion at a time.
hmm
Although we think we feel loads of emotions, just like thoughts, we can only have one thought at a time.
hmm
Um, and that emotion of what's the point in being here, or anger, or shame,
hmm hmm
or guilt, all these things. It's remembering that you cannot, while you're feeling that emotion, you cannot feel the love emotion or someone's love for you.
hmm
So very often someone looks from the outside and goes, well, how come they didn't see that I love them? How come they didn't see? Well, it's because as human bodies, we can only really experience deeply one emotion.
hmm hmm
You cannot be anger and a great experience of it.
Yeah.
A wonderful, enlightened experience and angry.
Uh-huh.
You can go between them,
Yeah,
and
you have to choose, and the same thing is with numbing your emotions, because that's one of the human reactions that we have. Well, I'm in pain, so I'm just going to numb it out, and I'm not going to feel
yeah,
anything. But the problem with that is you will not feel joy either. You can't select which emotion you numb.
that's huge. It's loneliness is a big one for me,
Yeah.
and I used to push it away as much as I want. I don't like
Mm-hmm.
loneliness. Get rid of it.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to be lonely. I go through my Facebook list. Hi, how are you? Hi, how are you?
Mm-hmm.
Anything to avoid that loneliness. Whereas I've learned that it's going to come out anyway, and it's
Mm-hmm.
going to grow and grow and grow until I look up and go, hey, here's loneliness. And I sit with it and be lonely with it. And then loneliness as an object says, you've took notice. It's
Mm-hmm.
okay now.
Yeah.
And like all feelings, they're information. They talk about the five senses.
Mm-hmm.
We've actually got way more than five, but we've actually got seven main ones.
Mm-hmm.
The five that everybody knows, and we have thought and feeling.
Mm-hmm.
Both of those are just senses to tell us that something's right or something's wrong,
Mm-hmm.
or
Mm-hmm.
and if we treat them as that rather than us, the problem is when we're deep in shame, or when we say like I am depressed, we become that emotion.
Yes. Uh-huh.
And when we are that emotion, you cannot be anything else. You cannot
Mm-hmm.
see that you are anything else.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas when we treat the emotions as visitors, I'm currently feeling shame. Why is
Mm-hmm.
that?
Mm-hmm.
And explore
Mm-hmm.
it. I'm
Mm-hmm.
feeling pain. Why is that? I'm feeling happy or
Mm-hmm.
enlightened. Why is that?
Yeah. And sit in with it, right? Because
Yeah.
we, since, I mean, since kids, we always hear bad feelings, just get rid of
Yeah.
it, keep it inside, especially for men. Let's be honest.
Yeah.
Boys are supposed to be tough. They're not supposed to cry. Hold it in, tough it up, man up.
Yeah.
I mean, whatever word you want to use. And then you grow up with this idea, and then every time you feel something that's supposedly bad, because I don't believe in bad and good emotions. They're
No,
emotions. That's
exactly.
what they are. They just are, and they're there for a reason. So sit in with it,
Yeah.
and maybe try, as you said, examine it, explore.
Yeah. Exactly. The same as thoughts. There's no good or bad thoughts. They're
Hmm.
thoughts. So it's no different than colors. That we
Hmm.
got a preference on colors. I got preference on thoughts. I've
Hmm.
got thoughts I enjoy and thoughts that I don't.
Yeah.
I got feelings that I enjoy and feelings that I don't. But it's with all with all of these things, and the same with
Hmm.
paint, I guess. It's what we
Hmm.
do with them.
Hmm. Yes.
And I always use the example of anger is a perfect example, because not everybody experiences the subtleties of shame and guilt and grief and things like that. But everybody knows what real anger is, real rage,
Hmm.
from a very young age. And anger is just an amazing, brilliant emotion, because anger is what changes the world. It's what
Hmm.
feeds kids, is what gets fresh water
It protects
thousands
you.
of
It
miles,
protects you. It's
and it
self-protection.
protects us.
Yeah, it does.
But
Yeah.
it's the action you do with the anger.
Hmm. Hmm.
You know, it's the action becomes either harmful or something that is beneficial.
Hmm.
You know, I could give someone that's angry a hammer. They can build a house for a homeless person,
Hmm. Yeah.
or they could hurt someone. It's not the anger the problem. And the same with the loneliness emotion or the shame and all this. The
Hmm.
emotion is not the issue. It's how we deal with it.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
if you are feeling real shame and you don't want to share what you've done and what you're feeling in life and how you've come to this place, because
Hmm.
nobody plans to get to the place of deep feelings of hopelessness. No one wakes up and goes, I'm going to feel hopeless today. And
No. Who
we
wants
get
that,
there
right?
by accident,
Yeah.
but we don't very often want to share the story of getting there, because it would it's just difficult to open up with that story.
And that's okay not to share, right?
Yeah, yeah.
That's okay. You don't have to.
It's you can recognize your emotions. You don't have
Hmm.
to share your emotions.
Hmm. Hmm.
Just share that you're struggling.
Hmm. Hmm.
You know.
Steve, thank you so much. I know this hasn't been easy for you. Thank you so much for being vulnerable with us. and for trying to help. Your message is very important, and I'm sure it will save lives. I'm absolutely sure of that.
Thank you. And my pleasure. And thank you for doing this. It's so important what you do. So many people
Mm-hmm.
want to avoid it, but it's, I don't want to say the word common, but it's not unusual
Mm-hmm.
for nearly everybody to feel like this at times.
Mm-hmm.
You
Mm-hmm.
know, you're not alone to feel like it.
Mm-hmm. Would you like to, what would you say to someone who is listening to you right now and who is contemplating suicide?
Take a deep breath and take some time out and reach out to someone.
Mm-hmm.
Reach out and say, look, I'm struggling. I don't need you to fix my problems,
Mm-hmm.
but but can you be there at the end of the phone if I need you at any point?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and ask them to respect you for not having to share your story. Just to be there. Can you check in on me?
Mm-hmm.
And think about what you have in life now that you would miss tomorrow. Perhaps think of a few things that you have right now,
Mm-hmm.
what you would miss tomorrow if it wasn't available.
Thank you.
My pleasure.
Thank you. Have a good day, Steve.
And you. Thank you, Paula.